Okay, our next video in our series of decimal operation videos is over dividing decimals. So I hope that you have your interactive notebook, and I hope that you are writing what I'm writing. That is absolutely the best way to learn this information and to make sure that it goes into your brain by writing it down and doing the examples with us. So our first step when we're dividing decimals, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. Our first step is going to be to ignore the decimal and divide like normal. So we're going to ignore the decimal and divide like normal. I know that might sound a little weird. Some teachers have students move the decimal at the very beginning of the division problem. I've been working with 7th grade long enough to know that sometimes when we move our decimal at the beginning, we mistake where our numbers are supposed to go. So then our decimal actually ends up in the wrong spot. So I would very much encourage you just to divide like normal, and then we'll worry about moving our decimal at the end. Step 2 is going to be to count the digits behind the decimal in the divisor. It's a really important mathematical word, and we're going to do an example in just a second. So in case you don't know, then hopefully it will be a little bit more clear. Step 3 is going to be to move the decimal in the dividend according to step 2. Okay, so we're going to count in the divisor and we're going to move in the dividend. And here is what that looks like. So let's say we've got 10.5 divided by 5/10. Okay, this guy right here is your divisor. This guy right here is your dividend. So in this case, we would count the number of digits behind the decimal in the divisor, which would be 1, and we would move that amount in the dividend, which would be 1. So count in the divisor, move in the dividend. Sometimes people say count on the outside, move on the inside. All right, so if you were with us for multiplying decimals, you saw that we actually really split our paper into about 4 sections. So we're going to do that same thing for dividing. So I'm going to just draw some really nice lines on the rest of my paper. And I'm going to split my page into 4. And we're going to start with just some simple division problems. Again, we're not worried if you can divide or not. That will come. What we're really talking about is where to place the decimal. So if you can, at the end of this video, if you can tell us where to place the decimal, then that is what we're looking for. So let's start with 5.6 divided by 0.2. Number 1, we have to know which one's the divisor and which one is the dividend. So the divisor is the thing that you're dividing by. So I'm dividing 5.6 by 0.2. So this is your divisor. So that means that 5.6 would be on the inside of our division problem, and 0.2 would be our divisor. Super important for us to remember. This is not always going to look like the bigger number. It's not always going to be the number with more digits. For instance, if we had something that looked like 5 divided by 7, the 5 would go inside and the 7 would go outside. So it's not always going to be what we think is the bigger number that goes inside of our division problem. Okay, so I like to use something called the hide and slide method. Basically what I do is I hide my division problem and I slide my paper over whenever I need more information. So I'm going to hide everything, I'm going to slide over. The whole preface with division, if you haven't done it in a while or if you just need a reminder, divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. One of my classes last year, I know it used to be dead monkeys smell bad. One of my classes last year came up with does McDonald's sell burgers? So divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. So we're going to do that. First thing, we're going to divide. How many times does 2 go into 5? 2 goes into 5 2 times. Multiply, 2 times 2 is 4. Subtract and get 1. And then it says bring down. Here's where the slide comes in. I'm going to slide and I'm going to bring down the 6. It just helps me to not have more information than I need, and it helps me to keep things lined up, right here, nice and lined. I'm going to divide. 2 goes into 16 8 times. Multiply. 8 times 2 is 16. Subtract. Bring down would be my next step, but if I slide over, there's nothing to bring down, which is great. So that means my division problem is done, but I do have to move my decimal. So it says to move the decimal according to how many places we counted in the divisor, right? So this divisor, there's 1 digit behind the decimal in the divisor, which means I move it 1 in the dividend and it comes up in my answer. So count in the divisor, move in the dividend, and bring it up to your answer. All right. Let's go to our next example. This next one's gonna look pretty simple. 1 44/100 divided by 12/100. Notice it's kind of written as a fraction. In 7th grade, you're gonna see lots of things that look like a fraction. A fraction is just a division problem. So if you think about the fraction bar, it's a fraction with a number on top and a number on the bottom. So it's just another way to write a division problem. So this guy right here is going to be the dividend, and this is going to be the divisor. Probably in elementary school or at the intermediate school, you've heard the saying top in, bottom out. You've probably heard that before. Top in, bottom out. Okay? We're going to use, actually, we're just going to do this one all together because I think if I ignore the decimals, this is 144 divided by 12. I think I can do that one in my head. How many times does 12 go into 144? It goes in there 12 times. 12 times 12 is 144. I subtract, and there's nothing to bring down. So at this point, I count the digits in the divisor. There's 2. I move in the dividend, and I bring up my decimal. Count 1, 2 in the divisor, move in the dividend, 1, 2, and I bring it up to my answer. Notice both of these examples happen to end up as whole numbers, right? 28 and 12. It's not always going to happen that way. Everything's not always going to be a whole number. These also, they start with decimals in the dividend somewhere. You won't always have that. Both numbers aren't always going to have a decimal in them. All right, let's look at our next example. 535 thousandths divided by 5 hundredths. 535 thousandths divided by 5 hundredths. Again, this is going to be our dividend, and 5 hundredths is going to be our divisor. Top in, bottom out. Let's use that hide and slide method on this one. Because we've got some extra information, let's go ahead and use that. So we're gonna hide everything else that we don't need right this moment. 5 goes into 5 one time. 1 times 5 is 5. Subtract and bring down. So I've got 0. I'm gonna slide it over. Here's where this hide and slide method is really helpful. At this point, I have to put something here, right? 5 goes into 3 0 times. Lots of people forget the 0 right here. They just go straight for the next thing. But if we hide and slide, then we know we have to write something right there. So now I can slide and bring down my next piece of information. 5 goes into 35 7 times. I multiply 7 times 5 to get 35, and I subtract. At this point, we're going to count the digits behind the decimal in the divisor. Again, we've got 2 this time. Our decimal is here in this dividend. We always have to go with where the decimal is in the dividend. So here, the decimal started here in this dividend. This one, it starts at the front. So we move it twice, and then we move it up into our answer. So this answer would be 10.7. Okay, one last example. Our last example is 234. 234 divided by 0.5. So again, the 234 is my dividend divided by my divisor. I'm gonna, again, use the hide and slide method on this one. So 234, 5 goes into 2. How many times? Well, 5 actually doesn't go into 2. So I'm gonna just put a placeholder, and I'm gonna slide over to my next piece of information. 5 goes into 23 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. Subtract, and I get 3. Okay, still not done. Bring down the 4. 5 goes into 34 6 times. 6 times 5 is 30. And I have 4 left over. In this case, when I slide over, notice there's nothing here. So this is why we put this example here for you. When you have a whole number, the decimal always starts at the end of your whole number. That's the only place I can put this decimal that does not change this number. This number is still 234 with this decimal here. So I'm gonna add a decimal and to add a 0. Now I have 40, and I can continue my multiplication and my division. So 5 goes into 40 8 times. 8 times 5 is 40. And that one finishes out really nicely. So last step, count the digits behind the decimal in the divisor, and move the decimal in the dividend. So here's my dividend. It would be here. And then 468 would be my final answer. Main things to remember, let's review. Ignore the decimal. Count the digits behind the decimal in the divisor. Then move the decimal that amount in the dividend. Good luck.